Hi, I'm Jen Peters. Thank you so much for joining me. It's really neat to have you here. So today we're going to be talking about inner child trauma or inner child wounding. Now this is something that affects all of us to some degree. There is a lot of us running around that actually aren't even aware that we have inner child trauma, and I myself, hadn't even heard of it, certainly didn't know about it until I was probably about 35-ish. And that's when I started on my healing journey and started to become a lot more aware, and that's the area I've moved into specializing in, because it is fundamental to really just about anything that's going on for us that is dysfunctional. It's nearly, I would say it's nearly certain that there's going to be an inner child attached causing the problems. So basically, what is an inner child? So an inner child is a fragment of ourselves that gets split off from our personality, from us, usually early in childhood, usually up until about the age of 7 or so. And now it gets split off in response to an experience that was traumatic for us. So just to give you an example, we might have had a parent that was really overly critical, for example, always made us feel like we weren't good enough, for example. Nothing we could do was enough. And so what we would tend to do very, very early on, usually the first time we experience the trauma, we will literally split off that part of our personality that we perceive as being not good enough. And that part of our personality will actually remain split off and frozen in time at the emotional age and stage we were at when we experienced the trauma. And that part of us will also form beliefs about that trauma. So in that case, for example, say a parent might really scold us quite harshly for doing something wrong or not getting it right and making us feel not good enough. So we split off that part of us and we actually create a belief that we're not good enough. Then from that belief, we start to create a whole lot of patterns. If we're not good enough, we might start to people please, or we might start to work really, really hard to prove that we're enough. Or it might be that we feel like we have to absolutely work so hard to earn love, because after all, we're not good enough. So that's how these come about. And what I've observed is that we have many, many, many inner children. I've observed that a lot of therapists, refer to one inner child. The truth is we have dozens and dozens of inner children, but they tend to be grouped into themes of wounding. Like you will have a whole group of inner children that have experienced emotional abandonment, which is extremely common in childhood. And there might be 20 of them that have experienced this in different ways. You'll have a whole lot who have experienced maybe not feeling not good enough or not worthy, or maybe it's unwanted. So we will have a whole lot of inner children that sit within each actual theme, and they've all got the same wound and they've all experienced the same type of wounding. But we do have many, many aspects of ourselves that are split off like this. So now the trauma, one of the confusing things for people, and understandably so, they tend to think that or believe that that they may have had a really great upbringing, really loving family, parents together and white picket fence and so on, and can't understand where this trauma has come from. So here's the thing. The trauma doesn't have to be overt. I mean, sometimes it's plainly obvious, that it's going to be traumatic, and it's no great surprise that there have been problems, as a result of the parenting or experiences. But the truth is that a lot of the trauma can be everyday stuff that we do as parents. I'm a parent too, and I think, oh my gosh, I can totally see why this kind of comes about. Even, for example, the emotional abandonment wound is most definitely the most common that I see, and the not good enough comes straight behind that. And an emotional abandonment wound can be caused simply by parents who are too busy to connect with their children, like they're too busy working or in survival mode themselves, and so the child doesn't get that true connection. Or perhaps, you know, when mum and dad spend time with the child, even though they're spending time with their child, they might be texting or watching things on the screen, you know. So this again is not truly connecting with the child, and they do end up with an emotional abandonment wound. And that is why so many of us tend to attract emotionally unavailable partners, because we have this particular wound there. So the results of these wounds are actually really quite significant, and they will impact every aspect of our life. So now, at least 80% of our programming, including our inner child wounding, is created by the time we're about 7 or 8 years old. And it's nearly always within the family system. Not always, there are some exceptions, but generally it's usually within the family system that it's been created. And generally through the parenting, you know, the way that these children have been parented. Now, each inner child, as I mentioned before, forms beliefs about the trauma that they've experienced, such as the I'm not good enough, and then they create patterns to cope with, oh my gosh, if I'm not good enough, I better be really, really, really good so that I am good enough, you know. So that's where we start getting into that pleasing and proving that we're worthy of being loved or enough to be loved, and so on. Now, these beliefs and patterns form the actual foundation for how we live the rest of our life. And I know that seems like quite a dramatic claim, but it is true. It is absolutely true. And you know, just for example, if you have, if there's a particular area of your life that's just really not going well for you, you can be absolutely sure that there will be some beliefs and patterns sitting underneath there that's causing this to actually happen, and there will be an inner child attached. So, as I mentioned, we have many, many inner children, not just the one. And when our inner child wounds are activated or triggered, we will respond from that wound. So for example, if we were 3 years old where that particular wound occurred, we will respond from the emotional age of a wounded and very hurt 3-year-old. Take, for example, the emotional abandonment wound, and I'll say this because it's so common, and I know many of you will be able to relate to this. The emotional abandonment wound, that usually happens very, very early, like sometimes even in the womb, believe it or not. If mum is narcissistic or is not connected to baby for some reason or another, it will actually occur while you're in the womb. But otherwise, it's in the very early years, the emotional abandonment wound. That's not to say it can't occur later, but it usually occurs much younger. But basically, if any of you have, you might be able to relate to this, if you've got this wound sitting there, what can happen is if you're in a relationship, for example, and you feel like the other person's pulling away or is going to leave you or abandon you in some way, you can become extremely panicky, like to the point that sometimes you can feel like you're going to die, which seems ridiculous. But what it is that you may have experienced this wound for the first time when you were a year old. And you know, when you're a year old, you actually were fully dependent, usually on mum, but mum and dad or a caretaker. So if if it felt like mum or dad wasn't going to be able to be there to take care of you and connect with you when you were tiny, then that would have caused this particular wound. And so when we experience the same type of situations in our adulthood, that little 1-year-old is triggered again and actually feels like it's going to die or not survive. And that's when we end up reaching out to people that we really should not be reaching out to, and we know better, but we do it anyway. And the other side of that is, of course, we might pull away when somebody's getting too close to us, when we just do not want to ever risk actually connecting deeply and emotionally like that again, and running the risk of being hurt like we were the first time. So if somebody is becoming very close to us, we will, like in a relationship, we're often likely to put a hand up and either pull away completely or put a wall up, but we just will not let them in, and it's just as panicky when we do that. So that'll give you a little bit of insight of actually how impactful inner child wounds are. So here's the thing as well, that we actually live our life through our own wounds. So in other words, we believe these beliefs. If we have a belief that everybody leaves us, we will be on the lookout and on high alert for signs that we're going to be rejected or abandoned in some way. And then we'll fall into the pattern of maybe rejecting them first, or clinging on, or pulling away. But there will be particular patterns that will become activated or triggered if you sense that you're going to be abandoned in some way. Same with a not good enough wound. If we've got a not good enough wound, we truly see ourselves as not good enough. And that's where we start comparing to other people, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not this enough, or I'm not that enough, or I need to be more like that. And the thing is with these wounds too, is that when we have these wounds sitting here, we're not able to fully receive the love that is here for us. Because we have a wound that tells us we're not lovable, we're not wanted, or we're not good enough or worthy, we will not actually accept the compliment. Just for example, if somebody says to you, if somebody was to actually try and give their love to you, you would not fully receive it. You might be dismissive, or just, say, oh, thanks, or you won't really let that land with you. And that's the reason why, because we actually have core beliefs sitting there telling us that we're not worthy of being loved, or whatever our beliefs might be. So now our unhealed inner child wounds, they sit in our subconscious mind. So what I see a lot of in this community is people doing amazing work, and I just really truly honor you for the work that you are doing. And there are so many incredible modalities out there. But what I do observe a lot of is that in most cases, if you're not getting the results you want to get, and you're not dissolving that triggering, and you're still continuing to play out these patterns, it will be because you're not going deep enough. Because see, these wounds sit in your subconscious mind, and that's where they need to be dissolved. So having an intellectual understanding, you could be a walking encyclopedia about your wounds, but it's not going to make them go away. You're still going to get triggered. You're still going to get brought to your knees. Okay, so the key here is to actually dissolve the inner child wounding in your subconscious. Okay, now the truth is there are particular skills, of course, to be able to do that. And because of that, I have created free guided healings here on YouTube so that people can access some healing that will take them into their subconscious mind and to the origins of their wounds. Of course, to go deeper and more expansive, we would do one-on-one work, which is really definitely taking us to the next level or 3, that's for sure. So now here's the thing, our unhealed inner children choose our romantic partners. How is that when you consider that our unhealed inner children wounds were usually caused when we were in those first few years of life, and that is who is choosing our partners for us. So basically they do this because they want to they choose our romantic partners to recreate unresolved trauma from childhood, and the hope that they'll then be able to fix it or resolve the trauma this time around. And that is one of the reasons why we continue being attracted to the same types again and again and again. There's also the vibrational match, of course, because the wounds are vibrational. So we will bring in other people who align with the wounds that we have. Okay, now here's some signs that you might have in a child wounding that really needs to be healed, because sometimes it's really hidden and we don't always see it. So there's shame, if you're feeling shame, anxiety, hypervigilance, that tells us that we're living on high alert a lot of the time. Perfectionism, the need to control or the need to be right. low self-worth, feeling not good enough. There's codependency, if you struggle with setting boundaries and standing in your boundaries, there's some inner child work there to do. If you've got a fear of abandonment or rejection, or a fear of not letting people in to get too close to you, that's an abandonment wound speaking. If you're finding yourself attracting toxic or narcissistic relationships or unable to get out of those kind of relationships, that's because of inner child wounding that still needs to be healed, and the patterns and the programs that we're running because of that wounding. It might be that you have the need to prove your worth, or that you're enough, or feel unwanted, unlovable, or undeserving. If we have unhealed inner child wounding, we'll often have unbalanced masculine and feminine energies also. If you find yourself performing or auditioning, people pleasing, fixing, caretaking, being manipulated through guilt, you're going to find that the reason is because you've got some inner children sitting in there. So as I mentioned, to heal, we need to go into subconscious mind to truly heal and dissolve them. What I find is it's just the most beautiful work. People often talk about this being really messy, but it's just not. Inner child healing, oh my gosh, it does depend on the techniques you use. For me personally, I use some traditional, but most of my approach is actually very galactic. So a lot of the tools and the guidance I'm using is galactic, and this allows us to access your subconscious mind really easily, even if you don't remember your childhood, which many people don't because they're usually in trauma, so they're out of their body, they are dissociated. We will still have full access to your subconscious mind and your Akashic records. It's just the most beautiful work though, because to go to those parts of you that are really truly in a lot of pain, and they have been for decades, you know, to see them and to hear them, to empower them with a voice, to love them and to bring them home with you is just the most beautiful work and gift that you could actually give yourself. It's truly really loving, very gentle, but extremely powerful. And when this work is done well, you can expect to no longer be triggered by the things that trigger you now. You can expect to step out of dysfunctional patterns that have been plaguing you for decades. And the truth is that when you do this work really well and in the right part of you with the right techniques, you can expect to actually experience relief, at a minimum, a tangible relief, but most of the time, a full dissolving of those wounds within a single session. Now that's with a one-to-one, obviously. If you're going to use my videos on YouTube, you may need to do them several times, but they'll still get you there. But if you're wanting to be more expansive and cover a lot more ground a lot more quickly, then one-on-ones are probably best for you. So if you want to take a peek at the rest of the channel, look at whatever's there. Where to start probably depends on if you read each of the titles. Just see which ones speak to you. Like some of them are going to really jump out at you, and that's when you know, this is the one for me. And expect to do them several times until there's no more emotional charge. But if you want to accelerate your healing and want to apply to work with me, then I would love that, and I would invite you to have a look at the link below where you can apply to work one-on-one with me, and we can make sure it's a great fit and go from there. Okay, my loves, I really hope that you have a beautiful day, and I hope that this was really helpful to you. Okay, my loves, take care. Much love. Mwah.